For 20 years, Zimbabweans have slipped into further poverty, their economy crushed by unsustainable debt and hyperinflation. The United States passed sanctions after then-President Robert Mugabe launched a violent election crackdown. Meant to target leaders, they have far-reaching consequences, including on ordinary Zimbabweans like Blessing Zinzi, an informal trader.
These sanctions have let us down and continue to suppress our business, and their wish is to see us suffer, but God will not forsake us.
In the late 1990s, this factory ran at full capacity and planned to expand. But international sanctions made attracting foreign investments impossible. It is now a shadow of its former self.
We used to employ over 350 employees here. We are now down to less than 50 employees. Just that tells you what sanctions are. We used to train refrigeration mechanics, and all the refrigeration mechanics that we've trained, which are much more than 300, have all left the country and are working all elsewhere outside the country.
The European Union eased sanctions in 2019, but the US has maintained its restrictions. Zimbabwe also does not receive aid from the International Monetary Fund. President Emmerson Mnangagwa, who succeeded Mugabe in 2017, has called for an end to rules which block banks from lending money to the country. Some Zimbabweans support his call, like this group that regularly protests outside US Embassy in the capital Harare. But the US demands that Zimbabwe hold more credible elections and respect human rights. It also wants the country to adhere to a court ruling to pay $9 billion in compensation to white farmers whose properties were seized during Mugabe's land reforms. The protesters, though, demand that the sanctions be scrapped unconditionally.
We don't want conditions to be given to the government or the people of Zimbabwe to say do this so that we'll remove sanctions. Actually, especially when it's being done by the so-called people who claim to be masters of democracy and human rights, yet they fail to uphold the things that they preach.
But the US refuses to carry blame for Zimbabwe's economic state. It points the finger instead to mismanagement and corruption. This is one of Tunisia's few existing recycling companies. It transforms mountains of plastic into industrial chips or granules. The company, called African Recycling, started in 2009. Today, it employs around 60 people, mostly women whose husbands are unemployed. Indirectly, the company gives an income to more than 200 people. Its owner, Tariq Masmoudi, has big ideas for the future.
This waste is an added value and we can create many jobs. We have a great lack of plastic waste in Tunisia. Instead of importing this waste from other countries and losing foreign currency, we can use it in Tunisia.
The vast majority of waste in Tunisia is buried, at the cost of the taxpayer.
The state is paying about 150 to 200 dinars per ton to dump this waste in landfills and to transport it. In Europe and in other countries, they see this waste as wealth. Many financiers in Europe have invested in waste to make money.
Now, landfill sites across the country are almost filled up. In the central city of Agareb, a site closed down a few months ago after residents complained about toxic fumes. But authorities had no choice than to reopen it after the neighbouring city of Sfax was buried under rubbish. The decision triggered violent protests mid-November, where one person died. Wali Madassi, an expert on the topic, explains the challenge of good waste management.
If you want to have solutions, you have to have a fixed strategy without being able to change it. And that's what we had in Tunisia. We've had many changes, and each time we come back to the starting point.
There is a further problem. Only a quarter of Tunisians pay housing tax, including a tax on waste.
If people don't pay to ensure the cost of treatment each time, we will never have a project. And this is the problem we have in Tunisia.
Authorities have opted for a hybrid method of sorting, compacting, and composting waste to tackle the issue. But that will only start in 2 years. Until then, the only recourse for many remains illegal dumping. The 10-story Ducor Hotel was once an iconic 5-star establishment, which counted VIPs and African leaders among its guests. Now, if it wasn't for the large swimming pool, its concrete husk could be mistaken for a disused factory. The Ducor had its heyday in the 1960s, but in 1989 the hotel shut, when back-to-back civil wars began, which left 250,000 Liberians dead. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Liberia's first post-war president, tried to renovate it in the late 2000s. She entrusted it to a company linked to the then leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi.
After Ellen took over, Gaddafi came and wanted to take over the building. He wanted to lease this place, and the government told the squatters that were here to leave the building.
At the end of the war, the hotel was occupied by gunmen positioned there by warlord Charles Taylor. Later, the Ducor became home to many Liberians driven out of their homes during the civil wars. The settlers were evicted 10 years ago, but according to this neighbour, they didn't leave empty-handed.
When the squatters left, they took everything out. They even took carpets, walls, they took everything out.
Despite the successful eviction, the government's planned renovation project, comprising 150 hotel rooms and casino, fell through. Liberia cut ties with Gaddafi's Libya in 2011 as the country descended into civil war. Renovation work stopped.
During the Ellen presidency, they wanted to renovate, but it never worked. So now it's just abandoned and guarded by security.
The Libyan company in charge of the project is now under European sanctions over its alleged links to the former Gaddafi regime. Liberian authorities have shared no information of the future of the Ducor Hotel, but some here still hope to see the Ducor reborn, potentially attracting tourists and generating jobs, and once again standing as a symbol of Liberian success.